Virus. I spoke this week with Senator Marco Rubio. We covered a variety of topics, including what he plans on doing with his school-aged children this fall. But we start with a pressing issue for millions of Americans across the country: the $600 a week federal unemployment benefit that will run out in a matter of days if Congress doesn't act.
Would you support extending the $600 payments?
I don't know yet, for a couple of reasons. On the one hand, obviously, the unemployment insurance will remain. What we're talking about is the additional $600 on top of it. On the one hand, you have a lot of people and employers and small businesses included that are saying to us that they believe that this is acting as a disincentive to bring people back to work. And that's what we're hearing from them. On the other hand is the reality that there are a lot of people that will tell you, we'd love to go back to work, but the place I work isn't open yet, and I can't pay my bills without it. So we got to work our way through it. There are also some additional unintended consequences to it. For example, child support payments that are adjusted to someone's salary. When you're on unemployment, those numbers change. So it's having an impact on the collection as well of the amount being collected on child support payments across the country. So it's a complicated issue. And I'm sure it's one we're going to have to deal with because the Democrats have insisted on an extension of it. So we can't pass a bill without them voting for it. So it'll be one of those things we have to work through to see if we can figure out a way to help the people who really need it, while at the same time making sure that we haven't created a disincentive. And that's not an easy needle to thread, but it's one we're going to have to work through.
Let me ask you this. In your heart, do you believe most Americans are just trying to stay at home and collect the extra $600? Or do you believe they're home, as you said initially, because we're telling them to stay home, because businesses are at limited capacity, some businesses are reclosing? Aren't the American people doing exactly what we've asked them to do? Shouldn't we be taking care of them by extending this benefit?
I think most people would rather have a job that's going to be there for months, not a benefit that's going to be there for 3 or 4. But at the same time, we can't ignore employers saying to us that they've tried to rehire people and who are unwilling to come back as long as the benefit is there because they're actually making more this way. Now, maybe the answer to that is to pay them more, which is what these businesses should consider. But we can't ignore what we're being told by some businesses out there. And I had a call yesterday with a chamber up in Daytona Beach, one of these Zoom calls, and one of the issues they raised. So I certainly can't ignore that that's being raised as a factor. I can't tell you if that's 1% of the people or 2% of the people, but it's certainly enough for them to raise it. But I still think the overwhelming majority, I haven't made it a sort of a centerpiece of what I've been focused on because I've always viewed it as A, the majority of people want a job, would rather have a job, and B, it was something that expired after 4 months anyway. But we'll have to work through it. I mean, we got to balance those two things.
Do you envision that there will be a response, there will be an answer to this within the next 2 weeks?
I would say probably by August 6th, just knowing Congress the way it works on deadlines. So August 6th is sort of the date when the August recess begins. And so my sense is that that's the sort of Congress usually doesn't do anything until it's facing a deadline of some sort.
Has the president bungled the response to this virus?
No, I think that's an unfair thing to say because, frankly, every country in the world is struggling with it. And people can point to New Zealand. Okay, New Zealand's a very small country that can basically seal off all travel and so forth. We're a large country, a populous country, a very mobile country. We're a state here in Florida where we have people that live here part of the year or people that live here 6 months in a day for tax purposes and travel back and forth. We're a state that invites people to come from all over the world and to visit us, and they have family here that they visit as well. So I think bottom line is this is a respiratory virus. It spreads when human beings come in contact with each other, and there's no way to make that zero, the case load zero, until we have a vaccine. You can put restrictions in place, and that will help lower it and slow it down, but ultimately, as soon as you crack the door open and people interact more with each other, as they are going to do with or without restrictions, by the way, you're going to have more cases. That's the case now in Japan. Israel's on the verge of reclosing. Spain has had a resurgence. Other countries in Europe and Eastern Europe are facing the same thing. India's had a new resurgence. The situation in Russia has been catastrophic. Latin America is facing extraordinary challenges in places like Brazil and others. So the one area where I think we all could have improved on is sort of come up with a concise message that everyone is putting out there, as opposed to some of the conflicting messages. And I think everyone has share blame in that. And that includes the CDC, who early on was discouraging people from using masks and on down from there. Because I do think that having sort of a unified message across every level of government that isn't partisan would be helpful in terms of this response. Instead, we've seen a lot of these things turn into sort of a partisan fight or a political statement about whether you're going to wear a mask or not wear a mask and that sort of thing.
And I accept that there's plenty of blame to go around, but when you talk about messaging, when you talk about trying to communicate with the public, nobody has a bigger pulpit, nobody has a bigger platform than the president. And it seems as if the president from the very beginning has underplayed, undermined all of the things. I mean, if there is a lot of blame to go around, the lion's share of it should it not be on the president for the message that he's put out. I agree with you. I think messaging is critical in this, and the president has failed on that front.
Yeah, I think that, of course, has to be balanced with the things they have done and that go in a different direction. So even, yes, should we have been able to address this early on in a concise way and set the tone for the country from the White House on down? Of course. By the same token, they took actions that showed seriousness. For example, the mobilization of the American private sector. 3 months ago, we were all worried about ventilators. Now we have extraordinary capacity. The operational warp speed that the White House has been very supportive of, which leaves us, I believe, at some point this fall, hopefully, with new therapeutic treatments that cut short the lifespan of this virus if infected, and unparalleled progress on a vaccine, which some believe we could have in place by the later part of this year, maybe more than one. Even as we speak, they're mass producing needles and syringes that they're going to need and able to deploy it. All of this has been driven at the federal level. So I do think they deserve credit for those things, because those things are going to make a difference here pretty soon, hopefully.
And speaking of messaging, Peter Navarro, in an op-ed in the USA Today this week, came out and attacked Dr. Fauci, saying he doesn't trust, doesn't views with skepticism, tries to undermine his credibility. The White House has also sent out some talking points to reporters, trying to point out every time that Dr. Fauci has been wrong or mistaken about something. Does that help? And what is your view of Dr. Fauci? Do you believe and trust the information you hear from Dr. Fauci?
Yeah, I think he gives solid epidemiological advice. That's what he is. He's an epidemiologist. Obviously, when we talk about the response to this virus, it's not simply an epidemiological response. We also have to respond taking into account all the costs and the benefits of decisions that we're making. So from an epidemiological standpoint, you would shut down everything and everybody would be at home until this thing was at 1% of infection rate or what have you. But from a social, economic, and political standpoint, that's unsustainable and it's undoable. I think he is an important voice in terms of giving us solid medical and scientific advice that, of course, has to be balanced with these other things. But I don't believe we have a Dr. Fauci problem. I think he's an important voice at that table whose advice needs to be balanced with and taken into account alongside some other factors that are very important. But I don't understand the internals of it. I don't know where that comes from, frankly. I think that in the midst of a crisis such as this, all of our efforts should be focused on responding, and these sort of things we can deal with later.
Well, let me just ask it bluntly. Was Navarro wrong to write an op-ed like that?
I prefer he not write it. Obviously, he has the freedom to write whatever he wants, and I imagine, he got the approvals internally to do it. But this is a country, one of the problems we're losing in this country is the ability to speak freely. He can speak any way he wants. People can criticize what he wrote. I don't think it's going to impact one bit our response to it. I do think it does, however, create this sort of continuing distrust. I have people telling me, well, I don't wear a mask because that's an effort to control me. Masks are not some novel invention. I mean, doctors, nurses, dentists have been using it forever to protect themselves and their patients. And if it has a 10% chance of working, if it has a 10% chance of getting us back to school, back to sports, back to business, work, and life, why not try it? It certainly isn't going to hurt anybody. And again, there's just a tremendous amount of distrust now that pre-existed the virus and has made it harder to respond to it as people have lost confidence and institutions and expertise, and it certainly is playing out here as well.